First development was the evolution of neoliberalism into unique branches of thought. While neoliberalism in the 1930s and early 40s was a sometimes ambiguous and amorphous figure, leaning heavily on general concepts of individual liberty, competition, and anti-collectivism, neoliberalism post-1946 developed in two noticeable directions. The first was the neoliberalism that was shared by the first generation of the University of Chicago economists and the German ordoliberal economists, headquartered in Freiburg, who tasked the state with overseeing competition while still placing value on social safety nets and anti-monopoly protections. The ordoliberal strand was implemented in post-war West Germany in the early 1950s to great effect, and the subsequent economic recovery of West Germany was dubbed Wirtschaftswunder, or economic miracle. The second strand of neoliberalism was concocted by the Austrians, along with the second generation of the Chicago School, who opted to completely recast politics and society in general as one massive, elaborate, thinly veiled market process that reduced human beings into rational utility maximizers. However, this was merely a highly sophisticated intellectual veneer to obscure a much simpler premise, which was to return economic and political power into the hands of a capitalist class that was in retreat due to the post-war consensus. By producing writing that designated politics as just another realm for economic rationality to conquer, the new Chicago neoliberalism created a philosophical feedback loop that justified producing research at the behest of wealthy interests who were seeking an intellectual case for recapturing the political system. It was the epitome of a short-term tactic masquerading as deep philosophical inquiry. In stark contrast to their ordoliberal colleagues, the new Chicago School redefined corporations, monopolies, and oversized trusts as, at best, benign entities, whose excesses would be passively corrected by a self-regulating, self-healing competitive system, or, at worst, the dismal result of some nefarious state intervention on behalf of an unscrupulous special interest, like a labor union. The new Chicago School's neoliberalism also carried a philosophical offshoot called public choice theory, which extended neoliberal market logic into all sorts of non-market contexts, including law, government, and the public sector. In this way, neoliberalism formed an epistemological sinkhole underneath all other styles of governance. Though the ordoliberal model achieved a notable success in West Germany, it was the new Chicago School's flavor of neoliberalism that would have a much bigger impact on world history. Unlike the German model, the new Chicago model would not be deliberately implemented in the economic policy of any nation until 1973, under the dictator Augusto Pinochet in Chile. But despite the horrific results found in Chile, this aggressive strain of neoliberalism still infiltrated the political systems of the United States and the United Kingdom by the end of the decade, finally escaping the margins of political thought where it had been slowly building since the end of World War II and entering the halls of power. It has since become the dominant economic paradigm of global society, successfully displacing the post-war embedded liberal system that came before. It is for this reason that when I use the term neoliberalism, I am referring specifically to the Chicago strand of neoliberalism rather than the ordoliberal variation. Each of these strands, the ordoliberal, the neoliberal, and public choice variations, were all products of the Mont Pelerin Society led by Friedrich Hayek, whose aim was to build a transatlantic network of interdisciplinary pro-market academics and business conservatives based in Europe and America. The development of this international network of neoliberal activists constitutes the second major development of the period. Academics, business leaders, journalists, and politicians all worked in tandem to establish free market capitalism as a legitimate policy alternative to the post-war consensus. The academic faction would produce neoliberal research in prestigious university departments, often with wealthy benefactors paying their salaries directly rather than the university itself. The business faction would then amplify that research through its recently established think tank network, which not only published this research prolifically, but also connected neoliberal academics with sympathetic politicians and journalists by hosting prestigious research conferences. A short list of the historic players in the neoliberal think tank network includes some of the most well-known think tanks in Europe and America, including the American Enterprise Institute, the Foundation for Economic Education, the Heritage Foundation, the Cato Institute, the Institute of Economic Affairs, the Center for Policy Studies, and the Adam Smith Institute. The avalanche of activity generated by this network eventually succeeded in the creation of an enormously important cultural accolade, the Nobel Peace Prize in Economic Sciences. The prize was established through a donation to the Nobel Foundation by the Central Bank of Sweden in 1968, 67 years after the first Nobel Prizes were awarded in 1901. To date, the prize has been awarded to at least a dozen members of the Second Chicago School, including at least 5 former presidents of the Mont Pelerin Society. The third major development of the period was the gradual adoption of neoliberal economics by the conservative parties of the US and the UK. The conservative parties of both of these countries found themselves on the defensive following the New Deal in America and the groundbreaking I.E.A reforms in Britain. Public programs like Social Security, the National Health Service, and other enduring examples of government activism were emblematic of the period.